What if the black skillet shoved to the back of your bottom cabinet, the one with the grease stain your grandmother never scrubbed off, is worth more than everything else on that shelf combined? 10 old cast iron skillets have quietly sold for hundreds and even thousands of dollars at auction, and the one most of you actually own is sitting at number one. Let's find out tonight if it's in your kitchen right now. Here is the thing almost nobody understands about cast iron: the weight is not the value, the seasoning is not the value. Real money hides in a handful of details most people never think to look for: the mark on the bottom, the smoothness of the cooking surface, whether the pan was poured into a mold by hand in a small American foundry or stamped out by the millions in a factory overseas. And those details stay invisible until someone tells you exactly where to put your fingers. If you have been cooking on a skillet your mother handed you and never once flipped it over, that is not your fault. Nobody taught you to read the bottom of a pan. Tonight, somebody will. We start at number 10. Number 10, the favourite Cookware skillet with the smiley face. Somewhere in a kitchen drawer or hanging from a hook in a farmhouse, there is a dark, well-used skillet with a small logo on the bottom that looks unmistakably like a little smiling face. Most people who notice it assume it is a factory stamp, nothing more. But that tiny face is a signature, and it belongs to the favourite stove and range company out of Piqua, Ohio, a foundry that operated in the early 20th century and made some of the smoothest, lightest cast iron of its era. The smiley logo ran from roughly 1916 to 1934. Here is where it gets interesting. Because Favourite Pika closed its doors decades ago, these skillets were never mass-produced the way later brands were. A number 7 or number 8 with a clean, crisp, smiley logo in good condition regularly sells for $200 to $700. Larger sizes and rare ghost-marked versions, where the logo is barely visible from a faint casting, have brought even more. I have watched one of these go for pocket change at a church rummage sale because the seller thought the little face was a defect. It was not a defect. It was a maker's mark worth more than the table it sat on. Number 9, the Wapak Indian head. If you have a heavy skillet with a small medallion on the bottom showing a figure in a feathered headdress, do not put it down. The Wapak Hollow Ware Company operated out of Wapakoneta, Ohio from 1903 to 1926, barely more than 2 decades, and that short lifespan is exactly what makes its pieces rare. Wapak used several logos over the years: an arc, a tapered word mark, a chicken foot variation, but the Indian head medallion is by far the most collectible. Here is the part that surprises people. Despite being a smaller operation, Wapak cast iron is often smoother and more refined than many pieces from the larger foundries of the same era. Collectors prize the Indian head logo above all others, and a number 8 skillet with a crisp medallion can bring anywhere from $300 to over $1,500. The crispness of the logo matters almost as much as the skillet itself. A sharp, well-defined headdress brings serious money. A faded or ghosted one still brings respect. But a misidentified Wapak sitting in a Goodwill bin, and I have seen more than one, brings nothing but regret for whoever let it go. Number 8, the gate-marked skillet with no name at all. Now here is a piece that fools almost everybody. You flip it over, and there is nothing. No logo, no brand, no city. Just a rough, raised line running across the bottom of the pan, almost like a scar. Most people see that blank bottom and mentally file it under worthless. That instinct is wrong. That raised line is called a gate mark, and it is a leftover from the casting process used before the 1890s. When molten iron was poured into a sand mould through a channel at the bottom, the excess hardened into that slash when the mould was cracked open. Foundries switched to side gating around the turn of the century, so a gate mark is almost a guarantee your skillet is over 130 years old. Some of these date to before the Civil War. Here is what the blank bottom is actually telling you. It is not telling you the pan is nothing. It is telling you the pan was made before brand stamping became standard, in an era when a single foundry worker shaped each one by hand. A gate-marked skillet in solid condition with no cracks regularly sells for $100 to $500 and sometimes more, depending on size and form. The irony is painful. The pan with the least information on it may be the oldest thing in your kitchen. Number 7. The Wagner with Sydney on the bottom. Pick up a well-used skillet and look for the word Wagner, sometimes in an arc, sometimes in a straight line, and underneath it, Sydney, or Sydney with a small O after it. That O stands for Ohio, and that simple stamp puts you in the bloodline of one of the most important cast iron foundries in American history. Bernard and Milton Wagner opened their doors in Sydney, Ohio in 1891, and within a decade they were producing some of the smoothest, most refined cookware in the country. Here is the detail that separates a $50 pan from a $2,000 pan. Wagner changed its logo repeatedly over the decades, and each version tells a different story. The earliest pieces, marked simply Wagner in block letters with no Sydney, date from 1891 to around 1910 and are genuinely rare. The stylized Wagner Ware Sydney O logo came later, in the 1920s and 30s, and those are the ones most families still own. They are good pans and they hold real value, but the early block letters are the prize. And here is the trap almost nobody avoids. In the late 1980s, a company called General Housewares launched a nostalgia line stamped Wagner's 1891 original. These are not from 1891. They are not antiques. They are worth about $15 to $25. The name on the bottom is not the whole story. The logo era is. Before we get to the top 6, there is something about all of this that most people never quite put together, and it is the reason so many valuable skillets end up in the wrong hands for the wrong price. The pieces worth real money almost never look it. They sit in garage sale boxes, in estate kitchen drawers, in donation bags headed for the thrift store, passed over because someone decided they were too heavy, too plain, or just old. But the weight was never the thing. What separates a $5 yard sale pan from a $5,000 auction piece is a short list of physical clues. The maker's mark, the logo era, the smoothness of the cooking surface, the size number, and whether the pan was truly made in an American foundry during the period that collectors call the Golden Age of cast iron, roughly 1865 to 1950. Almost no one is ever taught to read those clues, and that is the whole reason most of these skillets walk out the door for nothing. Number 6. The unmarked pan that is not actually unmarked. This is the one that costs people the most money, so let me be careful with it. You flip a heavy skillet over, you see nothing, no name, no city, no logo, and you set it aside. That is the mistake. Here is the correction. Many of the finest American foundries, Griswold included, produced skillets that were sold through department stores and catalog houses under private labels, and those store brands carried no foundry name at all. Griswold made unmarked skillets for retailers throughout its history. Wagner did the same. And after decades of use and dishwater, even skillets that were once stamped can lose their marks entirely. What you need to look for is called a ghost mark. Tilt the pan under a strong side light. A flashlight held at a low angle works best. And look for the faintest outline of letters or a logo just barely pressed into the iron. The shadow of a name that was ground down or lightly cast. If you can make out the ghost of the word Erie or the faint arc of Wagner, you are not holding a blank pan. You are holding an unrecognized piece of foundry history. I will not inflate this. An unmarked pan is harder to sell and almost always worth less than its stamped twin. But I have handled ghost-marked Griswolds that their owners had written off as junk iron. They were not junk. Number 5. The imported reproduction wearing an antique costume. Here is the uncomfortable truth most people do not want to hear. Not every old-looking cast iron skillet was made in America, and not every heavy pan is vintage. Starting in the 1970s and accelerating through the 2000s, overseas foundries began producing cast iron that mimics the look of early American pieces. Some even carry markings designed to confuse. Here is how you tell them apart with your hands. A genuine vintage American skillet from the Golden Age feels different than almost anything made today. The cooking surface is smooth, almost glassy, because the foundries machined it flat after casting. A modern reproduction or import feels rough, pebbly, like fine sandpaper. Run your palm across the inside of the pan. If it catches and drags, it was not finished by an American foundry in the first half of the 20th century. And check the weight. Vintage Griswold and Wagner skillets are noticeably lighter than modern pans of the same size because the iron was poured thinner and the walls were ground down by hand. If the pan feels like a dumbbell, it is probably not what you hope it is. Number 4. The size number you never thought to check. Most people never realize this, but the number cast into the handle or the bottom of a cast iron skillet is not the diameter in inches. It is a sizing number that dates back to wood-burning stove eyes, and some of those numbers are worth far more than others. Here is the rule that changes everything. Extreme sizes command extreme prices. A Griswold number 1 skillet, barely bigger than a silver dollar, is so rare that a single example sold for $9,500 at a Dinky's auction in 2024. Pattern number 411, a Griswold number 13 with its 12-inch cooking surface and early Erie logo, has fewer than 200 known to exist, and collectors have paid close to $2,000 for one. On the opposite end, a Griswold number 14 with a front pour spout sold on eBay in December 2024 for over $3,200, and a massive 20-inch hotel-size Griswold brought nearly $1,800. The common sizes, the 8s and 10s and 12s, are the ones everybody kept. The tiny ones, the huge ones, the odd numbers, those are the ones that disappeared, and disappearance is what creates value. Number 3, the smooth bottom test that takes 5 seconds. Here is a trick that collectors actually use, and you can run it right now with nothing but your hand. Pick up the skillet and flip it over. Run your fingertip across the bottom surface, the flat part that sits on the stove. If it feels smooth, with a machined ring or a polished plane, you are likely holding a pan from before the 1960s, when American foundries still finished their castings by hand on a lathe. If it feels rough and textured like the cooking surface of a modern pan, it was cast in a later era or a different country. Now look for a heat ring, a raised lip that runs around the outer edge of the bottom. Heat rings were designed for old wood stoves, and they largely disappeared from American production by the 1950s. If your skillet has one, it is almost certainly pre-1950. And the style of that ring, whether it is notched, smooth, single, or double, tells a collector exactly which decade it came from. One touch, one look, 5 seconds. And your skillet just told you more than any antique dealer would volunteer for free. Number 2, condition, the quiet destroyer. This is the one that humbles every optimist, so let me be honest with you. A rare, hand-finished, properly marked skillet with a crack is not a rare skillet with a minor flaw. It is a fraction of its perfect self. Here is your inspection, and it takes 30 seconds. Hold the skillet up to a light source and look at the bottom and the side walls for any hairline crack. Tap it gently with a wooden spoon. A solid pan rings like a bell. A cracked pan thuds. Now run a fingernail around the rim and the pour spouts. A chip or a rough catch you can feel will drop the price hard. Check whether it sits flat on a counter. A wobble or a spin means warping, and a warped skillet loses most of its collector value. And if it is pitted, covered in deep orange craters that go into the iron itself, that damage rarely comes back. The single biggest heartbreak I have seen in 20 years of buying estate cast iron is a beautiful old pan quietly destroyed by one flaw the owner never noticed. A perfect Griswold number 8 might bring $300 or $400. That same skillet with a hairline crack brings 40. Feel the iron, listen to it, it will tell you. Which brings us to the skillet almost every one of you actually has. Number 1. The lodge in the kitchen cabinet. If you have ever bought a cast iron skillet in America in the last 50 years, it is almost certainly a Lodge. That thick, heavy, pebbly surface pan with the small logo on the bottom, made in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, the same town where Joseph Lodge opened his first foundry back in 1896 after a fire destroyed his original operation, the Blacklock Foundry, the year before. Lodge is the last major American cast iron manufacturer still pouring iron, and it has been doing it for well over a century. You may have quietly assumed your Lodge skillet is worth something simply because it is old and American made. So let me tell you the honest truth, because I respect you too much not to. On today's market, a standard modern Lodge skillet changes hands for $5 to $15 at a yard sale. The collectors who want vintage cast iron are not looking for rough-surfaced pans from the 1980s and 90s. They want the smooth, machined finish of an earlier era. That is the hard floor. But here is the other half, and it is why this one sits at number one. Not all Lodge is equal. The pre-1960 Lodge skillets, the ones with a smooth machined cooking surface, a heat ring on the bottom, and a distinctive notched handle, are a completely different animal. A three-notch Lodge from the 1940s in clean condition can bring $75 to $200. A single notch from the 1930s, more. And the earliest pieces, the ones that may trace back to the original Blacklock Foundry operation from the 1890s, are genuine collector's items that rarely surface at all. And notice what just decided that, not the brand name. It was the era, the surface finish, the heat ring, and the condition. The exact four things you just learned to check on every skillet before this one. That is the whole secret of the kitchen drawer. The weight of the iron never set the price. The maker's mark, the logo era, the surface finish, and the condition